I'm David Biette. I'm Director of the Canada Institute here at the Woodrow Wilson Centre. The Canada Institute works to increase awareness and knowledge about Canada and Canada-U.S. relations among U.S. policymakers and opinion leaders. We focus on three primary areas: energy, environment, trade, and the topic of today's program, borders and border security. And a little background for those of you who are new to the Wilson Centre. The Woodrow Wilson International Scholars was founded by an act of Congress in 1968 as an official memorial to the 28th President as part of the Smithsonian Institution. At the Center, we build a bridge between the worlds of academia and public policy and business to inform and develop solutions to the nation's problems and challenges. Over the last 10 years or so, both Canada and the United States have put a lot of focus on what happens at our international border. We've seen the formation of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Canada's Department of Public Security, and Canada's Border Services Agency as part of Canada's public safety portfolio. But in a federal system like Canada, the United States, we also have lower-level governments, in our case states and provinces, that also have an important role in maintaining the security at our borders. Today's panelists will give us some insight into what's happening at the Canada-U.S. border from a more local point of view and the challenges they face and how they work together. And I'd like to thank the government of Quebec in particular for its support of the Canada Institute and for today's program. And a little bit of advertising. Next month on July 12th, we have a program on energy in the Arctic, not just Canadian Arctic, but the whole Arctic, so stay tuned for that. As I said, we are filming today's session, so if you have a question, wait for the microphone and please identify yourself and your affiliation. And FYI, the emergency exits are out and to the left. Late yesterday, we received news that our moderator, Frederic Lemieux, a professor and program director for police science and security and safety leadership at George Washington University, would be unable to attend. His wife had just gone into labor. So congratulations to him, and now it falls to me to do this. So I am not quite prepared, but I think it will be important to show his slides. And again, I just saw them this morning, and I will break a cardinal rule of reading from slides. I'm reminded of when I went to my daughter's back-to-school night in elementary school, and we had just come back from the principal's presentation in the auditorium in the classroom, and the teacher said, well, I was going to read from my slides, but someone stole that idea. So, but I'm going to break that rule today and go for just breeze through this. And again, I've seen them once, so but I think he lays out a good thing for us to start with. 7 deadly sins. I guess I could do 7 deadly sins of PowerPoint, but police cooperation, but cooperation without political support. A lot of these things will set the stage for what we're doing today. Cooperating without a purpose and a plan, cooperating without resource proportionality, cooperating without legal knowledge, cooperating without sharing all relevant information, cooperating without humility and understanding, and I think that's an important issue for just as a civilian, cooperating without communicating the needs. Operational structures. I'm sure he was going to go into this a little more on the research that he's been doing, but he mentioned the joint hit team, a counter-drug trafficking between Belgium, Luxembourg, France, and the Netherlands. Police officers work with legal framework of the country where each daily operations happens, considered to be one of the best practices by European Union members. Also, the police and customs cooperation centers, which are located in strategic border areas. They are key assets for intelligence exchange, coordinating hot pursuits, and supporting other imminent cross-border operational needs. As far as strategic structure, joint investigation teams, sharing information directly amongst members, requesting directly investigative measures, being present at interviews, house searches in all jurisdictions covered by a given team, building mutual trust between practitioners from different jurisdictions, coordinating efforts in real time and informal exchange of specialized knowledge, involving Europol and Eurojust with direct support and assistance, securing potentially available funding. So, Andy, we're going to start with Mathieu, okay, who is with Sûreté du Québec, International Relations and Protocol Branch. The bios are passed out, and so we will not read from those, but he's got great experience working on the border, and FYI, the PowerPoints will be posted later in PDF at the website, as will the bios. So let me turn it over to you, Mathieu.
Hi, everybody. So, thank you for inviting me for this presentation. The presentation, as David said, I am I'm a civilian member of the Sûreté du Québec. Sûreté du Québec, you could translate it to Quebec safety, or there's not really an equivalent in English, but in the old days, we used to be called the Quebec Provincial Police or the Quebec Police Force. So, but I'm going to use the term SQ during my presentation to help you. So, in the SQ, I'm an advisor in international relations. What that means is I'm working with our American counterparts to develop new partnerships, to new strategic partnerships like trainings, workshops, things like that, to help American and Quebec police officers work together, especially near the border. So today, my presentation, first of all, I'm going to do an overview of public safety in Canada, just to help you understand our public safety system. Then I'm going to try to explain to you what is the impact of policing near the border or policing with cross-border issues when we think, for example, against organized transnational organized crime or things like that, and what are the agencies involved. Then I'm gonna do a short history of cross-border policing before 9/11 and after 9/11. What were the impact of 9/11 on the Sûreté du Québec? And I'm going to finish by presenting to you what is right now our strategy towards improving our partnerships with the American law enforcement agencies. I think the objectives of this presentation is to explain to you that how it is important as a law enforcement agency to work in partnerships with our federal colleagues from the RCMP or the CBSA, but as well as our American colleagues at the federal, local, and state levels. And I also want to show you how we want all our members to have in their culture that it is important to be fully integrated as a public safety agency in the public safety issues in North America. So it's not only a Quebec problem, it's a continental problem. First of all, public safety in Canada. Public safety in Canada is a shared responsibility between the federal and the provincial governments. For example, it dates back to the Canadian Constitution. So according to the Constitution, the penal code, the criminal code, is a federal responsibility. So the criminal code is the same for every province and territories in Canada. And the Public Safety Department of Canada, Public Safety Canada, is there to, of course, coordinate the public safety departments in all the provinces, and has its own federal agencies, which are the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP, which is the federal police, the CBSA, which is the Canadian Border Safety Agency, and the CSIS, and many others, the CSIS being for intelligence. If the criminal code is a federal power, but the administration of police and justice in the provinces is a provincial power. So what that means is there's a public safety department for every province, and they have the power to have their own police force and justice system. The thing is, when you look at the map of Canada behind me, even though police and justice is a provincial power, most of the Canadian provinces have decided not to have their own provincial police agency, but to pay for the services of the federal police to do their own municipal and provincial police. There are two exceptions and a half in that, the two exceptions being Quebec and Ontario, and also the Newfoundlands, where it is a shared power between the RCMP and their rural constabularies, which is their provincial police, on some regions. So what that means, if you are in Quebec and there's a murder committed or a burglary or you have a driving ticket, it's going to be an SQ officer who's going to arrest you. If you commit a federal crime, federal laws being customs laws, immigration laws, if you commit something that includes a federal crime, it's mostly going to be an RCMP officer coming and arrest you. But mostly in these types of cases, it's going to be an SQ and RCMP officer coming to you, because most of these cases are done in partnership in special task force. So to give you an idea of the provincial system, so the Sûreté du Québec is the biggest police law enforcement agency in Quebec with around 5,600 police officers. Then the Montreal PD with around 4,000, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police with have around 972 or around 1,000 police officers in Quebec. So you won't see the RCMP in uniform, in their red uniform. They are mostly detectives, people who are criminal investigators, but those police agencies are mostly working all the time in partnership. Important thing too is we have a lot less municipal police forces in Quebec than you would find in the United States. So we only have about 30 municipal police in Quebec, who covers the biggest cities in the province, but all the rest of the towns, villages, cities, their municipal police force is the SQ. And what are the service the SQ provides? Well, it goes from general services, so community policing, criminal investigations, to specialized services, SWAT teams, bomb technicians, counterterrorism investigation team, organized crime investigations, and to national services. And by national, it's the national as the Quebec national, like in Quebec we have our National Library, National Assembly. So it's not, it means for the provinces, so protecting the National Assembly, protecting all the highways, coordinating the intelligence and fight against organized crime in Quebec. So Quebec is a very large territory for about 8 million people, and the SQ territory is divided in 10 districts, but when you look at where are the stations located, it's mostly in the southern part of Quebec, so mostly almost in 200 miles from the southern border. What is the border itself? Well, the border covers around 505 miles and covers 4 states, which are New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. But the border itself, if you look near the southern, like near New York and Vermont, that's where most of the big cities and population are. And if you go more near New Hampshire and Maine, it's mostly forest and very rural areas. Along the border, the SQ has 15 stations in every county that's along the border. So once you cross the border, you will be in SQ territory for the 500 miles of the border. What are the agencies involved at the border? Here we are at the Vermont-Quebec border and also New Hampshire. You see how the territory is divided in counties, and all the ports of entries, so the red dots, are of course covered by the Canadian Borders Safety Agency, so who cover the ports of entry into Canada. The areas between the ports of entry, but protecting the border itself, is a federal responsibility, so it is the responsibility of the RCMP. But then, once you have crossed the border, it is the you are in for applying the criminal code, provincial laws, traffic safety laws, emergency measures. You are in the SQ territory, so these are where are the stations located at the Vermont-Quebec border. What is the impact of the border on policing? Well, you could divide this impact in 2 types of categories. First of all, you have the public safety in border areas is influenced a lot by the presence of the international border. Of course, you have transnational organized crime, smuggling, things like that. So it brings certain types of activity, people you wouldn't recommend in small towns, but who are there a lot to do smuggling. You have emergency measures that are influenced by the border. What I mean by that is, for example, if you have a pursuit flooding a person who's lost in the forest, even though if that person is in the forest and by walking, that person can cross the border not knowing about it, and then she or he is not in Quebec territory anymore, but you have to coordinate with our American counterparts to find that person. Of course, information sharing, as we were saying, this is a very important aspect, especially for community policing. If you have a community like Stansted and Derby Line in Vermont, at the Vermont-Quebec border, public safety issues in Derby Line are probably going to be the same in Stansted. So if you have a lot of burglaries in Derby Line, this is probably going to have an effect on Stansted and vice versa. So this is important for our police forces to see what's going on, what are what are things going on, and this starts at a community level, but it goes further also to organized crime, national security. This information sharing is very important in the way we do policing at home. Also, the second category would be assisting federal agencies. So, for example, if there are people doing illegal immigration, usually they won't cross the border at the port of entries we have seen. They will usually try to go in the forest between the ports of entries. And when they cross the border and they're in the field, well, usually the people with the most manpower is the SQ, because we are there. So there's a big probability it's going to be a SQ officer meaning these people, or usually it's going to be because the CBSA has asked for our assistance in arresting these people. So our police officers are involved, even though they're not responsible of illegal immigration law enforcement. They are usually asked to help federal agencies in that matter. Also, as I was saying earlier, in all cross-border criminal investigation with the RCMP, usually the SQ investigation team are also involved. And especially in the Integrated Border Enforcement Team, what we call the IBETs. There are IBETs in Quebec. It's a task force for border enforcement. The SQ, if they don't have a criminal investigator involved, usually they'll be part of what we call the Joint Management Team, which says what are the objectives the IBET are going to work on at the border. But this kind of cooperation has a long history. For example, the SQ was created in 1870, and the first cases of cross-border policing we find in our archives date up to 1880. The picture you have there, the gentleman there, is a gentleman called, his name is Donald Morrison. He committed a murder in the eastern townships of Quebec in 1880, and then began the biggest manhunt almost of the history of the SQ. 80% of the force was looking for that guy. And it was not only the SQ, it was also sheriff departments in Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, all looking for that guy, and all over the place. So we had Maine police officers being in Quebec and Quebec officers in Maine looking for him. Finally, they found him, but that's the first example of cross-border cooperation. Many examples we usually hear about, especially the ones we heard about before 9/11, so in the 1990s, were a lot of drug tobacco trafficking, firearms smuggling, and the presence of organized crime, especially at the New York-Quebec border. And the picture you have there are good old bootleggers during the Prohibition era. So, this is the Canada-U.S. border at the Stansted Derby line, in Stansted Derby line. I have an example, a good old example here from 1928. It's a bit old, but that will show you what are the problematics about cross-border policing and what they used to be in 1928, but also what they are right now. So This building is called the Queen's Little Palace. It was located at the New York-Quebec border, and that's what we call a line house. So it's a house built right at the border. And what was going on at that time was during the Prohibition era, alcohol was legal in Quebec but illegal in the States. So on the Canadian part of that hotel, there used to be a huge bar. And at the New York part of the hotel, there was prostitution. And so what happened is people from Quebec entered from that door and came to meet some women on the New York side. I guess New York State was more permissive with prostitution at that time. And people from New York came and had a drink in Quebec. And this is in a lost area, but you could see that they even built railroads to help the tourists arrive at the Queen's Little Palace. How can you enforce the law if by the time you have crossed the border, you're not a law enforcement agent anymore? So if a SQ agent would come and want to arrest Quebec citizen on the New York side, well, by the time they cross the border, they cannot wear a firearm anymore because they're just a normal citizen. They cannot enforce the law. They cannot arrest. And they cannot enforce a law from another state. So what they did, I think it was with the New York State Police at that time, they made an arrangement. We are hitting the Queen's Little Palace at the same time. So the police officers from Quebec entered from the same door, the Quebec people, and the New York police officer entered, and they come and get their citizens, and they brought them back, and they put them into jail for trial. So that was one of the first success of cross-border policing, but the issues it is showing right now are the same we have today. So how can you enforce the law when you cross the border? But also, if you're in a small rural area and you have this kind of hotel, you can imagine that it's not only bringing honest citizens in your area. So it becomes a public safety issue as well. We had, at that time, people, it was the beginning of organized crime in Quebec. We had shootings, murders, people from the Al Capone gang in the streets of Montreal, in rural areas like that. So the smuggling crime is part of a big public safety issue that affects all of us in law enforcement. So there are thousands of examples like that of cross-border policing good stories. But if we go back after 9/11, I think it is important to explain that all these cooperation projects were very informal. It was law enforcement with law enforcement on specific issues, specific needs, a lot of information sharing, but not at political or government level, but more at the law enforcement level. But after 9/11, the province of Quebec realized that because our economy is so integrated in the North American economy, especially for exports with the United States, we also have to integrate our security priorities with the North American priorities. And in its international policy of 2006 that they published, for the first time, the Quebec government was talking about security in its international relations policy. So the way it was presented is the objective of the Quebec government is contributing to the security of Quebec and North American and of the North American continent. A lot of initiatives were put on, like establishing a security information unit, memorandums of understanding with the neighboring states for information sharing of law enforcement agencies. And for the Sûreté du Québec, before that, what were the main realizations were the creation of a counterterrorism unit, putting a liaison officer, but it's not really a liaison officer as the RCMP have, but putting a commission officer in Paris to share more with the European law enforcement agencies. Examples of of partnerships like that who help the SQ who help us have a complementary role with federal agencies in Canada for the fight against terrorism. Also, what it brought was the involvement of SQ officers in many task force. So you have the Integrated National Security Enforcement Team. We have police officers that are working with the RCMP in that integrated team. The IBETs that we talked about earlier, the MSED, the Maritime Security Enforcement Team, and also the Concept Project, which is a project that was created in 2010 and is now becoming permanent, which is a patrol at the border, a bit like the U.S. Border Patrol, but from the Canadian, on the Canadian side, and especially based on intelligence sharing and how we can work. It's around 40 people, people from the RCMP and SQ working together to protect the border between the ports of entries. Also, the SQ, because we are mostly, our role in cases of national security is the role of a first responder. The SQ put on many exercises, workshops. For example, the double impact exercise that was done in 2005 with the Vermont State Police and the Vermont State Public Safety Department. This example was a simulation of trucks, I think, carrying a bomb to New York City. And we had to stop the trucks before they crossed the border. And how can we exchange intelligence, work together with also firefighters, paramedics to work on this exercise? So that was one of the first exercise that was done in real time. Also, Zone 45 was another example, but with the New York State for intelligence sharing during a simulated terrorist threat. And most of these initiatives were concentrated, of course, on counterterrorism. Now, what the SQ is trying to do is learn from all these good initiatives that were done on counterterrorism and broaden the partnership philosophy to all its departments that are involved with the border. So the strategy that was built in 2010 is to work closely with our federal, state, and local partners to work better together to fight public safety issues that we share. And this comes from a lot of lessons learned from many departments where we have people who are proactive and work a lot with their American partners. And these partnerships are very efficient and bring a lot of advantages to those special units. So we're trying to take these best practices and share them with all the organization. So for example, we are working closely with the DHS, the FBI at the embassy in Ottawa in special cases. We are working with our state partners. With Lieutenant Manning, on my right, we're going to present to you some of the workshops that we've done together to help people at the local level to learn more about the different laws, different ways the agencies work, how to operate together. And this is going on at the strategic level, but also at the operational level. And as I'm saying, in all the departments that are involved, so field operations, criminal investigations, special units, we're trying to put forward all these partnerships so that we can really integrate the SQ in the North American public safety discussions. Some examples of what we've done lately. In 2011 and 2012, during the Easter holiday, there is a lot of traffic going on between Montreal and the United States. A lot of people are traveling to New York, Boston for the holidays. What we've tried to do is do a traffic safety without borders operation. That meant that at the same time, the SQ was doing traffic safety on the Quebec side. The New York State Police, the Vermont State Police, New Hampshire, and Maine were doing traffic operations on their side to show to citizens that traffic safety doesn't stop at the border, and that we all work together on traffic safety. That was a great operation that got a lot of media attention, and that's at the Saint-Bernard-de-la-Colle port of entry. You have the New York State Police car, the SQ, and the OPP, because also the Ontario Provincial Police was with us on this operation. We are organizing a lot of workshops with Quebec, with Vermont, with New York State and Ontario. An example of the workshop, just to finish, and then I'll let Lieutenant Manning talk about it, but what we are doing in this workshop is, for example, what happens if there's a traffic accident between the two ports of entries in Canada and USA? Because when you are traveling on the land border and you are entering Canada, you will cross the border before giving your passport to the CBSA agent and really entering Canada. So there's a kind of gray zone between the ports of entry, and there are traffic accidents going on during the year. We evaluate that there are around 10 accidents going on these places. And how can we coordinate the law enforcement agencies, the firefighters, to make a good response when there's a traffic accident? It seems simple, but then again, can you help another police officer in the United States when you are wearing a firearm, when you are not a law enforcement? These are the kind of problematics that we need to help our police officers learn that what they can do, what they can't do, and how can they do their job even though there's an international border involved. So that's one of the good examples that we are working on, and I would say that the feedbacks we have are very positive, because people like the fact that we are talking about border issues, and that it helps them in their day-to-day work to work on these border issues. So I think that's my conclusion, and I'll let my colleagues complete.
Merci, Mathieu. Thank you. Interesting to see how Quebec is involved, and I think now we're going to turn to Vermont. Mike Manning will give us a view from the other side of the border.
Good morning. I'm Lieutenant Mike Manning with the Vermont State Police, and I'm assigned to the department's Homeland Security Unit. In Vermont, the Vermont State Police has been designated as the lead agency when it comes to response to terrorism or terrorist threats. But some of the things that you're going to see in my presentation today is when you talk about whether you're talking about terrorism, if you're talking about transnational criminal activity, organized crime, or just single actors committing burglaries today in Derby Line and tomorrow in Stansted, it's important that everybody embrace the fact that you really need a whole community approach when it comes to law enforcement, when it comes to preventing criminal activity. And in order to do that, you really need to have buy-in from all the different agencies. I was very impressed with the deadly sins of policing and things that occur, because, again, I had never seen that presentation before, but it was similar things to what Matthew and I have talked about, and similar things to what we have worked through or attempted to work through when we've done our workshops between the Sûreté de Quebec and the Vermont State Police and the surrounding local and county agencies as well. So I want to kind of give you an overview about the state of Vermont. Again, we're a rural state. When you look at our population, some of you may giggle. We're the size of a neighborhood in New York. And I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea as to what we had for law enforcement resources in Vermont. And one of the reasons why we learned very early on the need to cooperate with other agencies. Talk a little bit about Vermont law enforcement, an overview of training and where that cooperation begins, and then give you a little bit of an overview of the Vermont State Police, and hopefully get the opportunity to answer any questions that you may have. So population of the state of Vermont, we have a little over 625,000. The state is just over 9,200 square miles. There's 14 counties, 251 cities and towns. Population of Montreal is ballpark?
3.5 million.
Okay, so 3.5 million. The largest city in Vermont is about 40,000 people. Again, our capital is within Montpelier. It's an open capital. I got kind of a kick out of today when I came in and had to go through a metal detector. In Vermont, once again, you can enter the state capital. There is a Capitol Police Department, but again, you have free access to the state capital. A little bit different than things here in D.C. The length of the U.S.-Canadian border has large zones of virtually non-existent border demarcation. This makes it unlikely that any amount of resources can entirely secure the border. The porosity of the border and the proximity to most of the Canadian population, again, 80% of Canada's population lives within 2 hours of Vermont's border, makes it ideal for criminal activity. Vermont's northern border is approximately 117 miles long. It's comprised of wetlands, woods, hills, a lot of farms, mountains. We have 3 international bodies of water: Lake Champlain, Lake Memphremagog, and Wallace Pond. And during the wintertime, when these freeze, they make very easy access to folks with all-terrain vehicles, snowmobiles, or if you just want to throw a backpack full of illegal whatever and walk across the border. Again, Vermont lies 30 minutes from the city of Montreal. According to numerous, and this is public information, numerous sources have identified in excess of 50 terrorist organizations active in Canada, active in the Montreal area. And when we look at what our greatest threat is in Vermont, obviously one of our primary concerns would be either acts or threats of terrorism. Now, again, being a rural state, the impact upon Vermont or the likelihood of an attack in Vermont is not as great as it would be in say, a New York City. But again, with a very porous border and ease of entering the country, and this is whether you wanted to bring illegal aliens into the U.S. or you're going to bring somebody in with the mindset of committing an act of terrorism, we have those obvious concerns and do what we can to prepare to prevent and detect those types of activities. And again, this stat is a little bit dated from 2007, but I thought it was important to just make a note that the IBET in 2007 had reported that smuggling along the border had increased by as much as 125%. Largest priorities, again, when it comes to border-related activity is obviously terrorism and smuggling. When we talk about smuggling, the greatest amount of activity will continue to be alien smuggling, and that occurs both north and south. Drugs, another concern, guns, and U.S. currency. Just to throw out some general information, when we talk about illegal drugs, marijuana and ecstasy are the 2 largest exports from Quebec into Vermont. Cocaine is our gift back to you, along with roughly $250 million in U.S. currency flowing north into Quebec. Again, as I said, illegal aliens flowing both north and southbound. And when it comes to alien trafficking, you have a lot of different situations. In some cases, you have organized trafficking groups. In other cases, you have family members just trying to bring family members together in Canada or the United States. Firearms seems to be really driven by the law of supply and demand. People will take advantage of the relatively non-existent firearms laws in the state of Vermont, and then they'll turn around and again bring those weapons into Canada, where Canada has very, very restrictive firearms laws. The state of Vermont has no permitting process. You can carry a firearm concealed or open anywhere within the state of Vermont, the exceptions being a municipal building, a school, or a state or a federal building. You can pretend you're from the Wild West and strap a gun on your hip and walk right down the main street in any one of our 251 towns and cities, and you're not committing any type of a law violation. Vermont being very much a sporting, or I don't know if a sportsman is politically correct, a sports person state. There's a lot of hunting that occurs in Vermont. So guns are widely accepted. There doesn't seem to be that concern or need to turn around and push to turn around and require permitting. You do need licenses to go out and hunt, but again, there's no permitting in order to purchase. You can walk into a gun shop if you're a Vermont resident, fill out the paperwork, buy as many firearms as you'd like, and then again, organized crime, outlaw motorcycle gangs, as well as single actors have taken advantage of this and taken those up to Canada in order to trade for money and as well as drugs. And again, as I said, terrorism is still really our greatest concern. The threat of somebody entering the United States through the Canadian or through the Vermont border and then heading to another destination such as New York City or a target on the eastern seacoast. Impacts upon law enforcement resources. Things that I think that is important for people to note is that anytime you increase demands for services, whether you put additional requirements or set additional priorities for law enforcement, there's only so much that a state trooper or police officer can do. So as we've seen greater demands for our services over the years, we've also seen that there's been greater demands and mandates that have come down. We've been able to take advantage of federal funding through sources like the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to really enhance our preparedness capabilities. I'll be very honest, without the funding from the federal government, Vermont would not be anywhere near as prepared as we are today. But as a result of reduction in funding, we've also seen that impact. When you look at things like the reduction in funding through the Burn Jag process and things like that, that impacts our ability to turn around and deal with things such as illegal drugs. So as we see greater demands for services as a result of threats or issues upon the border, we have to look at ways to make ourselves more efficient. So we look at things like data-driven policing efforts, using things such as DDAX, where you turn around and using information and intelligence analysis to make your efforts more efficient. Increasing efficacy with limited resources by, again, really drilling down into the core of where the criminal activity is occurring, really analyzing the MO, and then trying to address that with your resources, getting a bigger bang for your buck. Examples like Operation Stone Garden, HIDA, and several different task force are also ways that we turn around and work with our local, county, state, and federal counterparts in order to turn around and work in both a collaborative and really more efficient manner. Operation Stone Garden is a program that we work in conjunction with the United States Border Patrol. It's designed to put really boots on the ground along the Canadian border as well as on the Mexican border. So it provides funding to put local, county, and state law enforcement resources up along the border regions to help the United States Border Patrol and Customs and Border Protection with their mission of operational control of the border. But it also, from more of a local or state perspective, it also allows us really enhance and better the quality of life along the border for the citizens there. We look at things like the task forces. Again, we have troopers assigned to and local law enforcement assigned to the DEA, assigned to the ATF. We have troopers on the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which is run by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So thankfully, I have an agency and I have an administration that really supports working collaboratively with other agencies and embracing that model, because no one agency can turn around and deal with all of the threats and issues that we see in modern day policing. As a matter of fact, that photo was from I think it was from this Easter's efforts.
Yeah, exactly.
So enhanced cooperation and collaboration. Roughly a year or so ago, Matthew reached out to us and brought forth some ideas to increase kind of the collaborative efforts of our agencies. And we started a series of Quebec-Vermont border workshops in which we brought law enforcement from local, county, and state and provincial agencies all together and gave them kind of an overview of policing on both sides of the border, gave them the opportunity to, and this was something that we really found to be a great byproduct, was, getting the opportunity to get to know their counterparts. Whether you're the state police station commander at the Derby Barracks or the detachment commander over in Magog. Again, the issues are similar. The border at times can be a barrier for law enforcement, but again, it really doesn't provide much of a barrier or act as much of a deterrent for criminal activity. So by getting a chance for people to get to know each other, we now have station commanders and patrol supervisors reaching out to their counterparts, talking. On a larger scale, we've signed a cooperative agreement for information and intelligence sharing. And it's very, very important. Because we all know that the uninhibited flow of information, both vertically and horizontally between agencies and entities, is really critically important. So having that ability to share that information works out where our Fusion Center, the Vermont Information and Analysis Center, can share information with the Canadian government, with Canadian law enforcement. Members of the Vermont State Police, investigators, our executive command staff can share information freely, and receive information freely from the SQ. Knowing that, or taking some of the questions and concerns that we got dealing with the workshops, because again, the second day we start them off with a teaser. We give them an hour on a traffic accident. A very basic function that, again, Vermont State Police and Sûreté du Québec officers deal with every single day. But when you suddenly turn around and say, okay, the accident, the first initial contact took place in Vermont, but the point of rest is in Quebec. And you have injuries on both sides, you have witnesses on both sides, and then throw in a curveball like, oh, and by the way, the operator is drunk. Now all of a sudden you really have to have some serious discussions, because it's unlawful for me to carry a firearm in Canada. It's not, however, unlawful for a member of the Sûreté du Québec to enter Vermont armed. But if you were to ask the average SQ officer that, most of them would probably think that they couldn't do it. So how do you turn around and work cooperatively on something as simple or seemingly as simple as a traffic accident? And then after they get a chance to kind of work through that, then we throw a much more complicated criminal case by them, where now all of a sudden they have to start thinking about collecting evidence, and are the standards for a Queen's prosecutor the same as it would be for a state's attorney or for the Attorney General in Vermont? So it really builds into bigger discussions. Taking this information back from these exercises, we're going to build out a border operability guide, just some basic information. And I know that from the workshops in New York, it really looks like, as well as from some of the executive command staff from the SQ, it really looks like this guide isn't going to be just Quebec, Vermont specific, but more Quebec and the 4 border states, with some very basic contact information, and then some bulleted pointed information where if you're a brand new Vermont state trooper and there's a pursuit into Canada and you're hard charging to catch this person, hopefully you'll remember you can't invade Canada. You really do need to stop when you get to that border. On the flip side, it'll also tell them that it's okay to share information with the SQ. You don't have to get prior approval by a supervisor. So just some quick bulleted points that allow them to work cooperatively. And then policy review and recommendations, looking at ways that again, we can decrease the impact of the border upon interagency cooperation. Oh, and then again, the EMAC, the Emergency Management Assistance Compact. And basically the EMAC is it's a memorandum of understanding. It's been signed by multiple states and provinces, allowing for the sharing of resources during significant and critical events. That's an important thing because, once again, it allows us to send resources up into Quebec and to receive resources because, again, as Matthew said, if you're looking at an incident like a flood, the water doesn't stop at that international border. It doesn't recognize that border. Policing in Vermont law enforcement derive their authority under Title 20 of the Vermont Statutes Annotated. Police officers in Vermont, regardless as to jurisdiction, have full statewide power. So if you're a police officer in southern Vermont and you happen to be up by the Canadian border for some reason, you have the authority to make an arrest, you have the authority to take action. Criminal cases are prosecuted either by one of the 14 county state's attorneys or by the Attorney General's office. All of those members are elected officials. In Vermont, there are 55 municipal police departments. Those 55 departments represent approximately 11% of the state. The Vermont State Police provides primary law enforcement services for 89% of the state. There are 14 county sheriff's departments, but again, their law enforcement role is limited. It's primarily tied to the courts. State agencies, there are 6 in the state of Vermont, and all have defined missions. However, all 6 work closely together. There are 5 primary federal law enforcement agencies: the FBI, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, the Marshal Service, ATF, and the Coast Guard that are in the state. And there are no tribal entities in Vermont, so there are no tribal law enforcement organizations. Vermont law enforcement, again, we have a number of police officers that are considered part-time certified. It limits them on the number of hours that they can work in a week. They're required to attend 1 week of training, and then there's some follow-up training after that. Full-time officers, all police officers, regardless as to agency, attend the same academy. Back around 1970, the Vermont State Police formed a formalized academy in Pittsford, Vermont. It was the Vermont State Police Academy, and agencies started sending their members there because it was really the only organized law enforcement training that was occurring within the state. It was decided that it really shouldn't be driven by just one agency. And so the Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council was formed, representing, again, local, county, and state law enforcement needs and concerns. So they work together to manage the academy. The average academy class is, again, 16 weeks. To be a Vermont State Trooper, you have to attend 3 weeks of pre-basic prior to that. It's often referred to as summer camp, but I can assure you it's nowhere near any type of summer camp any of us have ever attended. And then there's 6 weeks of post-basic training that occurs after the basic academy before they go off for their field training. When you look at a Vermont State Trooper, when you consider it takes roughly 6 months to get a trooper trained, and then once he or she reports to a barracks area, you've got to learn the area. Our largest patrol area is 1,400 square miles, and that's often patrolled by true troopers. So it takes some time to really get oriented to the area, to get to know the players. So really for that first year, the learning curve is huge. My department, the Vermont State Police, is part of the Vermont Department of Public Safety. State Police is the largest of 4 divisions, but we worked very closely with Vermont Emergency Management, especially within my unit, the Vermont Homeland Security Unit. Preparedness is something that we have to work very closely together. Fire safety, when there's a request for a cause and origin investigation on a fire, you have a Vermont State police sergeant respond, who would be an arson investigator, investigate it from a criminal aspect, but you also have a safety and compliance officer from the Bureau of Fire Safety who will go there again to make sure that all the regulatory process is taking place to determine whether or not it's an accident or a criminal type event. Again, quick overview of the department. We were formed in 1947. We're by far not the oldest state police agency in the country. Our first commissioner was retired Major General Merritt Edson from the United States Marine Corps. So if you notice, the Vermont State Police uniform, our paramilitary structure, our code of conduct are all based upon the United States Marine Corps. Again, as I said earlier, we represent 89% of the state of Vermont when it comes to law enforcement services. We do that with 328 members. That's the strength of the department. And again, just some basic information about the number of barracks and troops. Overview of the state and where our offices are located. Rank structure. And then again, I've got the vision and mission statements, which I'm not going to bother to read to you, but the third paragraph down I just wanted to bring your attention to, and that one of the things that was very important to Colonel Esperance was embracing the task force model, recognizing the need to work collaboratively with other agencies. We will utilize the task force model whenever feasible and work collectively with other police agencies to impact crime on the highways and within our communities. This is a very important statement from the executive of the Vermont State Police to really push that down to all the members of the department to recognize and embrace that mission. And again, I won't bore you with all that. The department itself provides, again, primary law enforcement services to 89% of the state. We also support all of the local and county and other state and federal agencies in Vermont when it comes to special services and special teams. And again, I know there's a question and answer period. Is there anything very quickly before we move on that pops in anybody's mind?
I think we'll hold those and carry on, but with your permission, we'll post this afterwards, so
Absolutely.
the folks that didn't get to read that stuff on your organization, we can peruse it with more leisure later. So, across the border to New York State. Jim Horton from the New York State Office of Counterterrorism was going to give us his perspective from the Empire State and the northern border.
Well, thank you. I got nothing left. We're all set, which is actually a good thing. If they stole my material, because that means we're all on the same page. So I hope I'm not too repetitive. I will try to mention some things that my colleagues did not mention, but we are truly working hand in hand on the northern border to try to combat, we come from an all-crimes approach in New York, which I think we all do. But a couple of things I want to point out before I get going on my formal or non-formal. I don't have a PowerPoint. I'm going to kind of wing it and throw some facts and figures at you, just like my colleagues did, and talk about programs that we're doing. I'm not going to paint a rosy picture for you. I'm going to be hopefully brutally honest to show you that we have problems on the border. They have existed and they continue to exist, but we recognize them as the first thing you have to do is recognize the problem before you can fix it. But first I'd like to ask, is there anybody from the New York City metropolitan area? A couple of hands. I just want to point out that Yonkers is not really upstate. Okay? All right, so we've got that set. I see a lot of Yonkers is Westchester County there's about 400 more miles before we get to the border, okay? And secondly, I take exception to Matthew, how's my French? Good. With the Queen's Palace. And the joke about hockey players and whores come to mind. I think things have switched.
Yeah.
Excuse me. In any event, I'd like to thank you for having me here today on behalf of Governor Andrew Cuomo and my new boss, Commissioner Jerry Hauer, who has come from many positions, including the head of Office of Emergency Services for New York City during 9/11, and he was the head of the Public Safety Office in the state of Indiana, and he's come to our office within the last 6 months. He's a guy who wants to get things done, get things off his plate. You know, he makes decisions very quickly, which is the type of person I am. I come from a background, as you see by my resume, New York State Police, 5 years-ish as a trooper. That old saying about never volunteer for anything, I never heard that one, so I raised my hand a lot. And I was a diver, not a fun thing. No Caribbean dives. And I became a polygrapher and interrogator, which led me into homicide, and I spent 15 years in homicide, and that was basically my bread and butter and my passion. Ended up in the Attorney General's office, New York State. Got called by a guy named Elliot Spitzer. That didn't work out so good. And now I'm with the Office of Counterterrorism, which I've embraced it. I will tell you I'm not operational. I sit behind a desk and view all these programs we have to help combat terrorism. But again, we come from an all-crimes approach. Anyway, the security of our border between the United States and Canada has significant implications to New York State. Canada is one of, if not the largest trading partner with our state and the United States. So it's critical that there be an efficient flow of commerce and goods across the border. However, there are also a variety of security challenges that require collaboration and partnership among these various federal, state, local, and tribal agencies that operate on either side of the border, everything that we've said so far. New York State recognizes the importance of these partnerships and the need to continue these security efforts. So we wrote, 2 years ago, we wrote a Northern Border Strategy in my office. It's a three-pronged approach, and I won't bore you with the document itself. However, our strategic goals, number one is to prevent, and that is to prevent cross-border terrorist and criminal activity through an all-crimes approach, through information sharing and intelligence analysis. As my colleagues mentioned, they have intel centers, or you call them what you want, fusion centers. We have one in New York State. There, I believe, well, I don't believe, I don't want to throw out a number, but there are many intel centers across the United States. We have one near Albany, New York, which is the capital, and it's a task force of many federal, state, and local agencies that try to take in all the intelligence they can and then push it back to the field, the boots on the ground. Number two, to protect the residents of New York State and our critical infrastructure from cross-border terrorist and criminal activity. As you or you may not be aware of, the United States and New York State in particular receive most of our energy from Canada. This is pipelines, electricity, utilities of all sorts. We've got some on the border. We've got nuclear power plants. So it's strategic of strategic importance for us to protect these critical infrastructures. And both Canada, Quebec, and Ontario, we recognize that, and we work together with our critical infrastructure unit. Number three of the three-pronged strategic goals is to prepare for cross-border terrorist and criminal activity through effective outreach and coordination with our partners. Obviously, law enforcement goes without saying. Outreach is to people like you, doing events like this, but more so boots on the ground, the general public. We have to make people aware. The see something, say something saying, which is gone virtual now. That came from New York MTA, Metropolitan Transit Authority. And they have since let that saying go nationwide or worldwide. And break it down, it's very simple. If you see something, say something. If you see suspicious activity, we implore the public to help us out. Call. We don't care if it's nothing. Better to call than to just walk away and later find out, geez, I saw somebody with a backpack leave it. I was there, I saw it, I should have called. Too late. So we can't be everywhere. As the lieutenant said, in Vermont, they have under 300 troopers. They've got 1,400-mile square posts. We can't be everywhere. So we implore the public to help us out in that regard. What I did do is, or I mentioned earlier, this is not a new problem, cross-border crime. I pulled out an article a couple months ago that I found through some research. There's an article from a newspaper, and the title is Little Malone, Bootlegging Capital of the World, dated 1921. Now, Malone is a small city on the Canadian border. So this goes back generations, as Matthew mentioned, with the Queen's Hotel. You know, I joke about it, but there are people that live on the line, and there are so many border crossings that it's impossible to cover the border. New York State has 445-mile border with Canada. For my Canadian friends, that's about 716 kilometers, much of which is water, which is very hard to protect. The rest is obviously land and a mix thereof. We also have a very unique situation in New York State. It's called the Akwesasne Mohawk Indian Reservation, which is sovereign land. Which has anybody not heard of that? And don't be afraid to raise your hand. Okay, this is an Indian reservation. It's about 26,000 square acres, and it's situated right on the international border. It's got about 18,000 full-time residents, tribal. The reservation encompasses the state of New York, and within the state of New York, 2 counties. In Canada, so it's 2 countries. And Canada encompasses 2 provinces, Ontario and Quebec. So if you look at a pie, the reservation as a pie is cut up, could be cut up 6 different ways. And there are 2 police departments on the reservation, one in Canada and one in the United States, plus RCMP on the Canadian side, the SQ on the Quebec side, and on OPP on the Ontario side. And on the New York side, you've got CPB, which is Customs and Border Patrol. You've got New York State Police, the St. Regis Mohawk Police, many different agencies, DEA, FBI. It's alphabet soup in terms of agencies. Wherein lies the problem? If I was king of the world, we'd have 1 police department. However, I'm not, and we don't. In New York State, we have 588 police departments, which is incredible to me, and it may be to you as well. I hope it is. Smallest being, we've got 1-man police departments who have full authority, and we also have the New York City Police Department with nearly 36,000. So we run the gamut. And what happens on the reservation, or the border, does not stay there. It's like Vegas. Does not stay there. It goes north and south. Where Lieutenant Manning mentioned narcotics in particular, we get a huge flow of hydroponic marijuana through the reservation that comes south. And in turn, we trade it for either cash or cocaine, which goes north. Ecstasy, which is a Canadian staple, comes south, and we trade it. We send you guns. Aliens go both ways, but generally they do come south. Canadian immigration policy is different than ours, and within the border, or within this reservation, I should say, or the border itself, 92% of the Canadian population resides, and with the metropolitan areas, Ottawa, Toronto, and Montreal, is very diverse, as you know. And people can go through this reservation at ease with no problem at all. And we can't surround it. We can't stop the flow of contraband. It's just impossible. It's not physically possible. So we must rely on technology, and technology costs money. Money is becoming more scarce the further we get away from 9/11. As you know, manpower, the economy in both countries is, we have to rely on sharing of information. Now, after 9/11, I always say everybody was hugging agencies. Let's share, because I think we missed 9/11, as you know, because of failure to share information. Well, we can't do that anymore, and what we have to do is through these various programs that we've already that are in place, these IBETs, the Integrated Border Enforcement Teams, the BEST teams, Border help me here, Border Enforcement Security Task Force. You know, first of all, we don't have any teams unless we've got an acronym. We've got things in New York State called SPIDER, Strategic Police Intelligence-Driven Enforcement Response, which is essentially the boots on the ground, doing surges on the border, whether they be intel-driven. Well, they are intel-driven. That's what we're trying to get, and that saves money and manpower. To share information, break down the silos. But you heard me, at 588 police departments, police departments want their own autonomy. They want to, you know, they've got their own shield. They've got their own uniform. So, again, if I was king, we would have one police department, but we don't. So I guess I'm going to talk in a third person. What has changed since 9/11 in my experience in terms of the border, the fighting terrorism and cross-border crime? I think it's brought it to the forefront more, like things like today. We've got these programs, we've got a strategy, but it also brought more challenges. I can probably say with certainty that the border was not watched as closely pre-9/11 as it is today. So that's a good thing. And with that came challenges. We've put manpower and money on the border. However, in the United States, we've got our southern border. And I keep saying northern border. I apologize to Canadians. It's your southern border. But we've got our southern border with Mexico, which I'm sure you know has got a lot of attention. I think that's true because of economics, where the northern border, to me, is more criminal. And I think the economy in the presidential run to the presidential election, the economy is the #1 issue, I believe, today. So the southern border of New York, and we've got CPB people in the audience, I believe, who I would ask to speak up at any point or during the Q&A. They're losing people on the northern border. It was built up after 9/11. I think they're losing them now. So after 9/11, we did throw a lot of money. The federal government, DHS, did throw a lot of money at the border. We've had cross-border conferences, something called North Star, which is a high-level, 10,000-foot task force of high-ranking law enforcement officials from both sides that can talk to Ottawa, that can talk to Washington, and try to get issues brought to the forefront. To talk about big issues, and it was mentioned a little bit, cross-border carry of firearms. Now, we don't need guns to do investigations. However, Lieutenant Manning and his Vermont troopers and my troopers in New York State, they need to, you know, the border does not stop criminals. It means nothing to criminals, whether it be a town, a city, a county, or two countries. The border is, there's no line, there's nothing. They cross it without hesitation. However, a Vermont or New York State trooper just can't waltz into Canada in uniform with his car and his gun to investigate something as simple as a traffic accident or a homicide. Just can't do it. And to get to that level of where you can do it, you need a treaty. Treaties aren't easy to come by. Another problem we have is interoperability, where a Vermont trooper, a New York State trooper, or a police officer or a sheriff cannot talk to someone, RCMP, on the radio, push to talk it doesn't happen because the frequencies, the Canadian frequencies and the U.S. frequencies are different, and the law enforcement frequencies in the United States are actually commercial frequencies in Canada, like radio, AM, FM radio. So that's a whole another quagmire of treaties and agreements and memorandums of understanding that you have to get to, which is simply, in my view, bureaucracy. A lot of bureaucracy here. Since 9/11, we have had a better sharing of intel and information, a lot. It's gotten a lot better. We do understand each other's policies and laws. We have different laws. However, the crimes are the same. If someone commits a burglary in Quebec, it's the same as a burglary in New York State. It's a crime, that's the static thing here. Crime is crime. We just may call it something different, but we investigate it the same. We've learned that Canadian privacy issues are different than ours. So that's an impediment right there. Sharing of intel and information is a little hard sometimes. I'm not saying it's a bad thing with privacy laws. I respect civil rights and privacy. But we're just different. What are some of? I'll talk in a third person again. What are some of the common pitfalls and difficulties we've had in terms of cross-border and cross-jurisdictional collaboration? Distance, population. Your Canadian population, like I said, is within 90% of it is within 100 miles of New York State border. However, our population strength is in New York City. New York has got about 19 million. About half of that is New York City, Long Island. When you get up near our border, the population is very sparse. So it doesn't get the attention that it may well deserve in terms of law enforcement. Multiple layers of government is always an issue. You know that. I've already said that. Multiple layers of law enforcement. Best practices I can highlight, again, the BEST teams, the IBET teams, these task forces. I don't want to bore you with the acronyms. Stone Garden, we participate in Stone Garden as well. It's a federally funded program that pumps money into equipment and overtime and backfill. Now, police chiefs, let me explain, and sheriffs and troop commanders and station commanders, they have their troopers and sheriffs and police officers have their everyday crime. They're policing accidents. They're just doing domestics. They're doing burglaries. That's what they worry about. That's their bread and butter. That's what they need to respond. And then you add something called terrorism to their plate. Here's the problem. They're short of manpower. They're short of money. They can't dedicate people and equipment solely to terrorism. When one of their citizens calls in 911, they need help for whatever, they're expecting a police officer, sheriff, or trooper to show up. So it's very hard for them to do outreach, etc. We have another program in New York State called Operation Safeguard, which I think is outreach to you, the public, where when they have time, we ask police officers, sheriffs, and troopers to go to businesses that may encounter suspicious activity. For example, self-storage units, we all have them. They're not, they've been around for maybe 20 years, but bad guys use these a lot to store bad things. So we go to them and we say, if you realize something a little suspicious, please call us. And then we do something called a red team or red cell operation, where we'll send undercover police officers into a self-storage and act suspicious and see what happens. And generally, good things don't happen. People don't call. They don't want to get involved. We do hotels and motels. We leave paraphernalia in the room to see if the maids notice anything, maps, dressed up in the bunny suits, masked, loading their van, and see if anybody notices it. We do railroad stations. We've got over 100 sectors that we cover. Beauty parlors. What's so suspicious? Well, hydrogen peroxide. That's what bad guys make bombs out of. Beauty parlors have that. I don't need it, but, you know. So anyway, we have a lot of good things going on. What do I see moving forward as problems? Complacency. The further we move away from 9/11, complacency with us all in this room. We're tired of hearing about terrorism. It's you know, first it was a little sexy. Everybody's attention was on it. We were hit right where it hurts the most, and we've come complacent. Okay, I got the hook. Anyway, and lack of funding. Washington and Ottawa, you know, again, I go back to the economy. It's a number one issue in our presidential election right now. So funding, you've got law enforcement, we've got the toys. Let's use them. Let's start sharing information. Let's cooperate with each other. We're only as good as our weakest link. So we have to look at this as a whole. And believe me, I wanted to paint a good picture, but I don't want to tell you everything is perfect. But we're trying our hardest to share information, intelligence, and work together, especially on the border, and keep the commerce and the goods flowing and our partnership intact. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I think with our three speakers, we've seen a good representative from Quebec and Vermont and New York State, and then Jim also bringing up that quagmire where New York, Ontario, and Quebec meet at the reservation, which, as you said, the alphabet soup of acronyms goes on and on and on and on, and who's in charge. And I commend to you the film Frozen River, if you haven't seen that. Great movie that takes place up there and addresses a lot of the issues. It's well acted. Melissa Leo was in it. She's the one who dropped the F-bomb at the Oscars a year or two ago. But anyway, I would also like to commend to you our publication, One Issue, Two Voices. It should be out there on sharing of information privacy. It was written by the American point of view of the DHS Privacy Commissioner. And this comes up all the time when you get scratched below the surface on issues between Canada and the United States. There's a different concept of privacy in Canada and the United States. So with that, let me open it up to you for questions. We have interns with microphones, and please identify yourself and speak into the microphone. Anybody? Okay, up here. Wait, yep.
Thanks. I'm Devin Lebuick from the Canadian Embassy. I was just wondering if there is any form, at least in your lines of work, if there's any form of collaboration with the Nexus program, especially in terms of cross-border trade.
Nexus is a federal thing.
Yeah, I was thinking if there was any form in terms of sharing identity, or because I know they track certain or they have members, and I'm not sure if there'd be any form of collaboration with policing, especially at the state level.
Okay, CBP people, CBSA, anyone want to say anything? Sitting on your hands.
I know that what I can say, but it's I've heard stories of people taking advantage of their Nexus card and being arrested, but it's more like operational, just anecdotes than there's no real involvement in. Right. As David said, it's a very federal responsibility.
And it's convoluted. Having tried to renew my Nexus card in the last week, I won't go into that, but it's not easy. I'll throw one out there. We're talking about the East Coast, but can anyone address what's happening with your counterparts in other provinces and other states, particularly, say, the Washington, B.C. corridor? You've been in meetings with them, or how this works, how things may differ across the border?
I can speak to that just in terms of we're all on the same page, which is good. There is a BEST team in Blaine, Washington. It was one of the first ones stood up, I believe. And we have collaborated with them, met with them through the U.S. Attorney's Office, and recently had a 2-day conference in Lake Placid, New York, with all the U.S. Northern Border and Northern Border U.S. Attorney's offices and Canadian Province Queens offices. So we do stretch across the 4,000-plus mile border in terms of same programs and dealing with the same issues.
Over here.
Jen Schultes from Congressional Quarterly. I was just hoping you could give some anecdotes of when some of the privacy differences in privacy laws have been difficult to work around.
Well, again, I can't get down in the weeds in terms of specific investigations, but a little repetitive. Canadians' privacy laws are a bit tighter than ours, and recent court decisions. I forget the name of the decision, but it was very detrimental to both, I think, the RCMP and as the issue of sharing information goes with us across the border. Do you recall what that case was?
Yeah, I think that sometimes, for example, we see that the laws are tighter. If I go, I think the first meeting I had with the Vermont State, they said, okay, well, we can give you access to our database, and when I was like, okay, but maybe they want access to ours, but it doesn't. We cannot give access to the laws are very restrictive, but at the same time, what the laws say is a police officer in the United States cannot access Canadian database, but he can ask a police officer, I need that information for that reason, that's what I'm going to do with it, and the police officer can give him the information. So it's not a technological issue, it's very it really has to be based on trust, like trust between police officers. That's what we need to build on, because the way our privacy laws are made is it's the decision of the judgment of the police officer to share that info. So usually it works, but there's a lot of work that's got to be put on human trust and those human partnerships.
And it's important to demonstrate not only a need to know, but also a right to know. You know, again, it's important on both sides of the border to protect, you know, personal information, to protect the protection of civil rights. So, again, when it does come to the exchange of information, right to know, need to know is really an important thing.
I would add just the publication that we have outside, and about 2 years ago, a look on our website, we had a program with the Privacy Commissioner from Quebec addressing similar issues to this. So it's an issue that we've been kind of following, and it keeps coming up, and I think we'll probably do more on it. But the publication is good, and then you can also, we had a program on it, and you can follow the presentations and the summary on that.
Hi, Teresa Brown, Sentinel HS Group, and former DHS attaché in Ottawa. So I have to ask about Beyond the Border. And the Beyond the Border action plan has specific action items regarding interoperable policing, interoperable communications, and from your perspective at the state-provincial level, how do you see states and provinces interacting with their federal counterparts in programs like ShipRider and the follow-on integrated policing that they're doing? And then there's another entire area on domain awareness along the border that the federal agencies are looking at. And are you participating with them in how states and provinces can assist? I know you mentioned the Concept program in Quebec with that domain awareness along the border. Thanks.